Hey everybody, this is Jeff Beston with Intuiface. Thank you so much for joining me today. My job in the next few minutes together is to impart my passion for Intuiface to you. I will do that by first helping you understand what the heck Intuiface is to begin with, and then beyond that, helping you understand why it's just a kick-butt piece of software specialized in enabling you, not me, not somebody you pay, but enabling you to create amazing interactive digital experiences. To do that, we're going to do a couple of things. I'm going to start by showing you what you can build with Intuiface. Then we'll discuss the key components of the Intuiface platform. We will slide over into the main part of this webinar, the design philosophy and concepts, in other words, a demo. And then wrap things up by spending a little bit of time discussing what to do with the amazing content you've created with Intuiface. But to begin, what can you build with Intuiface? That's a great question. Let's figure that out. So, looking at your screen, you can see a set of experiences created with Intuiface. If I tap this and move it out, it's building burgers. This is some guy named Da Vinci. Looks like a museum exhibition. And here we have a digital sign that is somehow weather sensitive. So you can see these three different experiences targeting completely different audiences with completely different interests, using completely different layouts, with completely different content. I mean, there's nothing held in common by these. Now you might be wondering, Jeff, are these things you sell? And the answer is no, these are not things we sell. These are not templates from an Intuiface library. You control every single pixel in your experience. Intuiface lets you control the design, the storyboard, the layout. You control everything. I'm not kidding. When Intuiface goes to trade shows, that thing that used to exist and is slowly coming back, savvy Intuiface users would be running experiences that were so well designed that we could not tell it was Intuiface. There's no giveaway. There's no tip-off. That's how much freedom you have to build anything you want. It could be for any audience, in any market, for any reason. Build whatever you want with your media, your brilliant ideas. Intuiface just makes it very, very simple to create these beautiful, interactive digital experiences. This is a look at the Intuiface platform. This is what exactly it is you're going to be using when creating, deploying, managing, measuring your interactive digital experiences. On the left, you can see Composer. That's the editor. That's the tool you use to run your to create your interactive experiences. It runs on Windows. It only runs on Windows. You do have to have a Windows PC or a Mac running Windows, in an emulator like Boot Camp, a virtual machine like Boot Camp. You can take your images, your videos, your documents, your 3D models. You'll see all that in the demo, but that's where you're creating your experience. That's where you're weaving your magic and controlling every single pixel. On the right is Player. You see that there on the right. Player is the runtime. It's the tool used to run the amazing stuff you built in Composer. So you're building in Composer on Windows to the left. You're running in Player on multiple operating systems listed on the right. Notice Windows, Android. See my bouncing mouse? Android, BrightSign, iOS on the iPad, Samsung Tizen, the Chrome operating system, and LG's WebOS for their smart signage displays. So you can run natively an experience built in Composer on any 7 of those operating systems in Player. You don't have to know anything about those operating systems. There's no expertise required. Player looks the same, acts the same. Your experiences look the same, act the same. That's the beauty. You don't have to know anything about those platforms. With Intuiface version 7, we introduced 2 new deployment options. You see those on the right. The ability to deploy experiences to a web page and the ability to deploy them as an app on a personal mobile device. They both, under the covers, use similar technology. It's modern web technologies. It's running in a web page as if it was just native code, HTML5 code. If it's running as an app, it's a progressive web application. Some of you might be familiar with PWAs. So the same stuff you're building in Composer to run natively on these devices in a venue, You could also deploy on these particular operating systems, as you see listed here, you can deploy them in a web page or as a PWA, a personal web application. It's a progressive web application. Pretty amazing, the freedom you have for deployment. Between Composer and Player, you can see an entire cloud-hosted infrastructure containing additional capability. You do not have to be online to use Composer. You do not have to be online to use Player. But if you are online, then there's a whole bunch of other stuff you can do represented by the Intuiface cloud. For example, content management. Intuiface has its own content management system. We call it a headless content management system because the data structure and the content stored for that data structure is independent of the user interface you've built in Composer. So one way to think about that is the same base, the same headless CMS base could be used for multiple different experiences because the base is headless. It is not in any way dependent on the user interface, unlike a traditional digital signage CMS where you need to know the zones, right? There's an explicit mapping from the CMS to the zones in the signage deployed in the field. Here you don't have to know anything about Composer, nothing about Player, nothing about the UI. You just worry about content, which is a beautiful thing. And there's lots of cool aspects to this natively integrated content management system. As you'll learn later in the webinar, you don't have to use our headless CMS. You can use just about anything you could think of, but there are advantages to using ours. After that, you can see experience sharing and deployment. So deployment is remote deployment, pushing experiences to players anywhere in the world, regardless where you are, regardless where they are. Of course, they have to be on the network, but assuming they are, you can do that. And sharing is about collaboration. Could be with colleagues making edits as well. Could be with clients. Could be an internal client. Could be an outside paying client. Previewing work. Is this what you meant? How does this look? What do you think of these changes? That sort of thing. Account management is, license management, invoice management, sort of the nuts and bolts of being a customer of ours. And then finally, the analytics piece, data display and publication. Intuiface has a really extensive analytics capability built in. And that doesn't just mean data collection, it also means data visualization, the ability to create charts and dashboards. And just like the headless CMS, I'm going to talk about analytics a little bit later and why you'd be crazy not to do it. But we will cross that bridge when we get there. Let's continue on with a quick look at what we call platforms. So if you want to become an Intuiface customer, you need to purchase a platform. There are 3 different platform levels: Essential, Premier, Enterprise. No matter what platform level you purchase, that annual license, you can get month to month for Enterprise, but typically you're buying annual. Whether it's Essential, Premier, or Enterprise, you're going to get 1 Composer license and 1 Player license. You always will get that. You can buy more players if you want. You can buy more composers if you want, depending on your tier. Notice Essential limits the number of composers and players. Premier and Enterprise does not. And in general, that's the difference between tiers, is scale. For example, the number of headless CMS base users, or the number of data points per player, or there's a scalability aspect to it, and some features that are somewhat unique. And so remote deployment, as we discussed a moment ago, that's unique to Enterprise. So you always start as a customer with a single platform plan license, and then you buy as many additional composers and players as you wish. But everybody has access to the headless CMS. Everybody has access to analytics. Everything in the Intuiface cloud. Just an issue of scale. Keep this in mind. As an evaluator running our 28-day trial, you can do everything. It's as if you were at the Enterprise tier. In fact, in a way, it is the Enterprise tier. It's just a 28-day Enterprise tier. That's what the trial is. The only limitations on the trial are you have to be online. That's just about it. There's a couple small things. We put it in our help center. But the only one you really need to keep in mind is this need to be online. Other than that, it's completely unfettered. So you have no excuse not to try everything and convince yourself that Intuiface is right for you. So no matter what I tell you, don't worry about the platform tiers. Go to our pricing page. Not only will you see the tiering, you'll see the prices. Be my guest. But as an evaluator in the trial, you're Enterprise. You can do everything we can do. Excellent. We're done with the preamble. I'm now going to jump into the demonstration of Composer. This is where the magic happens. As I said, not much to see in Player. Player is just the runtime. It runs your experiences. Nothing very exciting to see. The running experience is exciting to see, but not Player itself. Composer is a lot of fun to see, so we're going to look at Composer, which you can see right now. There's a blue ribbon up top, notice, with lots of circular buttons. We'll be going through those. I would say Composer is a little like a Photoshop or an Illustrator. If any of you have experiences with those platforms, you're going to get a similar vibe. The good news is that it's much simpler. And what I mean is I have no idea what I'd be doing inside an Illustrator. It's complicated stuff. Composer's not complicated. I mean, there's a lot here. We're version 7. I mean, there's a lot of stuff built into Composer. But it's not hard. You just don't know it yet. You just need to figure it out. And I'm going to help you understand it a little bit by starting with this panel right in the center of the blue ribbon. You see that up there? We call that the Scenes panel. This is the list of scenes in my experience. And I don't know, there's about 15 scenes in this experience. You could think of scenes as slides. We call them scenes partly to differentiate them from slides because slides typically are sequential. Slide 1, slide 2, slide 3. Often you number slides, right? That typically happens. You wouldn't really number a scene because there's a decent chance that the way your audience experiences the scenes is out of the order in which you designed them, right? If I have a table of contents on scene 1, then the item your audience selects might send them to scene 23. Do they care that they're on scene 23? No, they don't care. They just want the stuff they were interested in. Is it important for you to let them know they're on scene 23? Why? What's the difference? Again, they just want the information they requested. So from the audience's perspective, they're just getting the information they want. They're navigating based on their wishes. Under the covers, they might be going from scene 2 to scene 50 to scene 23 to scene 99. Who knows? Who cares? Now, as the designer, okay, maybe you care, right? And so this scenes panel is really for you, the designer, and other designers, right? So you give scenes names. Your audience will never see the scene name. But that's for you and your other designers. You can give them an order. Your audience will have no idea what the order is, but it could help you to organize your work. You can create sequences. See what you can do with Intuiface and getting started and philosophy and concepts. Those are sequences, logical groupings of scenes. Your audience will have no idea you're using sequences, but you can to organize your work. And the same thing goes for the names of these scenes. Your audience won't know. But if you name your scenes X1, Y2, D3, that's going to be tough to manage, right? So I named these 4 period space triggers and actions, 7 period space headless CMS, share your experience, right? That's for you. Now, I suppose if you're working alone, you could be pretty careless about the names, but as soon as you collaborate, you should give it a lot of thought. There's no right or wrong number of scenes. As I said, this is 15. You could have 1. You could have 101. I guess that sounds awful to manage, but I suppose you could. And you'll see the Add a Scene button down there on the bottom. Whichever scene I pick is the one that opens in the canvas. So here we are in Scene, Sequences, and Layers. I've opened up that scene in my canvas. That's where I'll do the actual editing. Let's jump to the round button to the left of the Scenes panel. You can see that up top called the Scene Structure panel. So the Scene Structure panel is an inventory of the items in this scene I'm actively editing. In other words, there's a one-to-one correspondence between everything in the canvas, everything in the scene, and everything in the Scene Structure panel. So for example, if I click the rectangle 6 thing on the left, well, there you go. It's highlighted in the scene. If I click the title there on the right, you'll notice it's highlighted in the Scene Structure panel. There's a one-to-one. Even if it's not visible, stay with me on the left. You see the little eyeball there next to the text asset? If I click it, I'm toggling the visibility, you'll notice it disappears. It's there, it's just not visible. And you can see that indicated on the left. The eyeball is crossed out, the representation got a little gray, but it's still there, so it's still listed. Let's get to know this panel a little bit better on the left, for starting with this thing. Well, actually, let's go to the tippy top. Let's start with the top. So you see that node way at the top? That represents the experience as a whole. No matter what scene you're on, that thing will always be there, that node at the top. The reason it's there is because the experience as a whole has its own properties, triggers, and actions. And we'll talk about that concept later. But there are times where you want to play with the properties, triggers, and actions of the experience as a whole, and you can do that. So that's in every scene. No matter what scene you're in, you're going to see that in the scene structure panel. You're also always going to see this row with the white rectangle. You see that there? Now, it's got a name of the scene. The name of the scene is appearing here in that row, and that row represents the scene as a whole. Not the stuff in the scene, but sort of the parent. And why? Because that too has its own properties, triggers, and actions. You might need to modify that. So there you go with the white rectangle. We looked at rectangle 6. We looked at the text asset that's in the scene. So what's that thing called middle? Get that thing called middle. You notice it's a little grayish, I guess. It's not fully black. So the thing called middle is a layer, specifically a scene layer. Going back to this sort of Photoshop analogy, if you've used a product like that, you might be familiar with the notion of layers. It gives you the ability to control the order of items along the z-axis, the order of items in and out of the screen. We all know the x and y-axis left and right, and the y-axis up and down. Well, the z-axis is the axis in and out of the screen, and when items are interactive, that matters. If you want people to touch something and it's behind something else, it's kind of awkward. That's a bad Z order. So you can add additional scene layers. Now, you can't have 0 scene layers. You got to have at least 1. I can rename that, by the way. It doesn't have to be middle. I could just call it Jeff if I wanted to. And if I want to add others, I just hover my mouse over the scene node, and you got the little round circle there at the end. You see that? And if I hover my mouse, it says add a scene layer. So I can add more. I don't need more. Maybe 1 is fine, but I can have multiple, and that can allow me to force a Z order. Let's stay on the left. We have this thing called template. Now, what is that? Because again, it's got a funky color. It's not the color of the background of the scene structure panel. It implies it's special somehow. And let me unlock it. You can lock and unlock things in your design so that you can make changes accidentally. Template is also a layer, but notice it's not a child of the scene. The template is a child of the experience node. It's not a child of the scene. That thing called template is an experience layer, not a scene layer. It's an experience layer, which means it is universal to all scenes. It's a little like a master template in PowerPoint, but better. And here's why. In PowerPoint, that template is reproduced. There's a new instance of that template for every slide. In Intuiface, there's a single instance of an experience layer in memory across all scenes. It's the same instance. It's not reloaded for each scene, and that's a big deal. And a simple example is music. If I put music in scenes, same song, and you navigate from scene 1 to scene 2, the music is going to stop and restart. You're leaving the music in scene 1, you're loading the music in scene 2, it's going to stop and restart, which is kind of bad. You want the music to play through the transition. Put the music in the experience layer. Then when I navigate from scene 1 to scene 2, the music is unaffected because it's not in the scene, it's in the scene layer. And those layers are universal to all scenes. I could put home buttons, back buttons, company logos, that sort of thing could be put into experience layers. Unlike scene layers where you have to have at least 1, you could have 0 experience layers. There's no rule that you have to use an experience layer. I happen to add one and I called it template. I could have called it George. I happen to call it template. I thought it was valuable for this webinar because I want to teach you the concept because you're going to use it. It's important, but you don't have to. Notice if I hover my mouse on the left over the experience node, similar round button to the scene node, but now I can add an experience layer. See that in the upper left? I can add an experience layer. In fact, if I click it, it says, do you want to go behind the experience or in front of the experience, which is pretty cool. Forgive me, behind the scene or in front of the scene. So you have a lot of control there. You can have as many experience layers as you want. You can have 0. That's up to you. I mention it because you're going to use it. It's really useful. Let me reinforce the point with one more small exhibition. If I click in the upper left this image, you notice it's highlighted down there on the bottom right. I'm going to drag it to the upper left. Supposedly that image is in the experience layer, which means every other scene with the experience layer should have it in the upper left. Let's go to the next scene. Yep. It's always in the upper left. And no matter what scene I'm on, if I drag it to the bottom right and go back to the original scene, it's in the bottom right. Pretty neat, pretty simple, very powerful. All right, scene sequences and layers experts. Let's move to the next topic. We'll call that assets and collections. Assets are the graphic and auditory media you use to tell your story. If you look at that first button in the upper left-hand corner, you can see the list of asset types. It's an opportunity for me to talk about this notion of Lego blocks. I always like to make this analogy that in a way, Intuiface is like a set of Lego blocks. It's a finite number of pieces, a lot of pieces, but a finite number of pieces that can be combined in an infinite number of ways. That's Intuiface. Finite number of pieces, combine them in an infinite number of ways, and here's some of the Lego blocks on the left. Images, videos, YouTube videos, webcam, 3D models, some text assets, image assets, a couple ways to embed websites, the web browser is a published web page, HTML frame asset is raw HTML5, JavaScript, style sheets. It's a whole mix of stuff. All right, whole mix of Lego blocks that you can use to tell your story. You just drag and drop them in. For example, the image. Drag and drop it in. Now, here's something interesting. You'll notice that when I dragged in the image, it's a container. It doesn't know what image, of course. Maybe there's an infinite number of images in this world that I could be using right now. It doesn't know which one I want. So there's an implication here that there's a difference between the container and the content. And that's an important distinction because it implies that if you can differentiate the container from the content, then maybe I can assign content at runtime, that I don't have to know in advance what I'm going to show. And that's true. In fact, it's one of the powerful features of Intuiface is you can create your own templates that are essentially populated at runtime. And very often for interactive digital experiences, you don't know what you need to show at runtime because you're building it in January. It could be running in November. Things have changed tremendously since January, so how could you possibly have known in January what you're going to show? It could be changing on a daily basis. We have people building endless aisle retail kiosks with Intuiface. Things change every minute. So this ability to populate Intuiface experiences on the fly is a pretty critical aspect to it and to your ability to be successful. So that's a nice little example there. What I'll do is I'll be a little more explicit here. Let's open up File Explorer here. And I'm going to grab an image. We'll do Beetlejuice. Everybody likes Beetlejuice. Okay. So I've put an image down there into my canvas. Notice I can use my mouse to rotate, resize, and zoom it. You'll learn that Intuiface is what one calls a what you see is what you get editor. WYSIWYG. You ever hear WYSIWYG? So I can do whatever I want with this image, put it wherever I want. I need to change one property though. And we're going to go deeper into properties later, but let me open up the properties panel for this image. You'll notice there's multiple property categories here on the right side, and each one allows me to control different aspects of this image. In particular, you'll notice for the moment, it's a static image. You see that on the right? It says it's static. I'm going to make that free. If it's static, I can't interact with it. I want to interact with it. See the triangle up top? Lets me test my work. Let's test my work. Play. You're actually using Player. We embed Player inside Composer so you can test your work. You don't have to install Player separately. And lo and behold, it is fully interactive. How cool is that? Nice, simple little example of no code. You didn't have to tell it to be interactive. You didn't have to write any code. It just is. Isn't that simple? Let's go back to the File Explorer. Let's drag in a few more images, 2, 3, and 4. There you go. So you got a bunch of images in there. And if we move up one level, I know I have a video. Yep, there's my video. I'll bring that over here. If a PDF file, I'll bring that over there. Okay. So I got about 4 or 5 images, a book, and a video. I'll move the video up here, the book down there, and make the video a little bit bigger. Notice how quick and easy this is if you know what you're doing. There's the book. We have essentially an image wall, right? I mean, that's what this is. And I could resize things a little bit. I guess there's not much point to it. I'm trying to be quick. Let me highlight all of these things. I notice I didn't lock my design. You see that? Let me go back to the scene structure panel. Look in the upper left. Lock. See that? That way I can't accidentally manipulate the logo on the bottom right. So that was a good mistake. All right, let me highlight all of this media. Like this. I want to get the title. Right click. Before I right click it, let's just change a property. which is on the right to make it pinnable. So pinnable means that it starts as static, but it starts as free, but I can make it static. That's what that means. So I've made all of that media pinnable. Play. Let's play. All right, and you can have, there's my video with a play handle. I'm going to play that. Here's my book. Let me pin the book, and I can start paging through it. See that? I have my image wall here, and I can manipulate multiple images in the video and turn pages and images all at the same time. So that's pretty crazy, but simple, right? One image, one book, one video, one book, 5 images. They're all interactive at the same time. It's a messy design, but I can do it. Intuiface has no limits to the number of concurrent touch points. That's determined by the hardware, not by the software. If the hardware supports a 20 points, 60 points, then Intuiface supports 60 points. You can do it. If the device supports 1, Intuiface supports 1. So it's determined by the hardware. You can build multi-screen display walls with Intuiface, in which case, if it's a 2x2 wall and each screen supports 10, that's 40 total touch points, and that's okay. You can do that too. So that's purely a hardware limitation. You have total freedom in what it is you want to build. Now, what I created right now is kind of a messy design, but all right, that's pretty obvious. You want to come up with something a little smarter than that, but you certainly have the freedom to do it. So that's the notion of assets. We've got lots of different kinds of assets. I want to show you collections now, so let me remove the video and the book. I'll highlight these images, right-click, and add them into a group. You see that in the pop-up menu, Add into Group? Group is a type of collection. It's a single context for multiple items. And there's multiple kinds of collections. This is just one kind. We call it the group. A little similar to the notion of a group in PowerPoint, where everything is kind of collected together. I might use the group collection in Intuiface to make a data sheet. It's a title, a big image, a paragraph of text, 3 more images, a video, a price, a button. You could put all those inside a group collection. People can move it around the screen and interact with the button and do what have you. It's good. You're going to use groups. For sure, you're going to be using groups. Probably not first, though. There's other collection types, and some you're more likely to use. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, we have the Properties panel. I opened it up a moment ago. In this case, what I'd like to do is show you some additional collection styles, and I can do that in the Properties panel with this drop-down. You see that drop-down there? For example, Asset Grid. The Asset Grid is pretty simple. That's just rows and columns. It defaults to 1 row. You can see that on the right. The Properties panel defaults to 1 row. So whether I have 5 items or 55 items, it's going to be 1 row. First thing I want to do, bottom right, make them a little bigger, 450, 450. And then using my mouse, I'll make that a little bit bigger. It's pretty good. Again, back on the right, in the rows property, I could make that 2, right? And then I can play with the visuals, but that's not very interesting to me. I could make it a vertical asset grid instead of a horizontal. The point is it's a single list with no notion of focus. Everything is sort of an equal player. If I go to play, I'll push the play button up top. Then using my finger, I can swipe my way through the asset grid. Right? It's like a gallery. And that's one of the common uses of a collection, is to create a gallery. You don't have to have the same types of media in a collection. You can have images, videos, documents, 3D models in the same collection. You can do it. In this case, it just happens to be images. But there are other collection types. Stay with me on the right. Asset flow. The asset flow does have a notion of focus. There's something in front. Using the Properties panel, I'll increase the aperture and the wingspan, but I'll make things a little bit bigger and play. So how long does it take? A couple seconds, right, to manipulate it with my mouse. The Properties panel, now we've got a brand new collection. How cool is that? Back to the editor. Let's change it to a carousel. Everybody loves the carousel. Here we have the carousel. I'm going to play with the view angle. Diameter a little bit. Play. Everybody loves the carousel. I hope you were sitting down. I should have warned you. I should have told you to sit down because of how amazing that is visually. But that's simple, right? I mean, come on. Yeah, there's lots of properties on the right. There's lots of different kinds of collections, but it's not going to take you long to figure out how to use it. It's really just more about picking the right design approach to realize your vision. Other collection types, you can see it on the right there, circular panel. There's the group collection we talked about. Helix is like a strand of DNA. The Ken Burns effect, that's not really meant to be interactive. It's slowly panning and zooming on an image. One image at a time, it kind of slowly zooms into focus and pans around. And the map collection I'm going to show you because it's cool. Pinboard collection is a scene within a scene. If you remember, when I resized the group, all the items inside the group resized to 2. If I resize a pinboard, I'm resizing the window to the items inside the pinboard. It's pretty powerful what you can do with that thing. Scroll collection, it does what it sounds like. I can have a whole bunch of items and be sliding them left and right or up and down, and everything kind of moves relative to each other. Again, can produce a lot of cool effects with that. Swap collection is one item at a time. And then the timeline collection was a little bit like the map collection, as you'll see in a moment. So let me get rid of the collection, open up the collections panel from the blue ribbon up top. I'll drag in the map. We support 2 map providers, Mapbox and Bing. You can actually see it on the right in the Properties panel, Mapbox and Bing. You could choose to use either one. You'll notice that with Mapbox and with Bing, doesn't matter which one I choose, there's a message in the map window that says you need credentials. So that's not us, just how they operate. They have free credentials, they have paid credentials. It determines your level of access to their map tiles. Using my mouse, I'm in edit mode, right? But using my mouse, I can double click and I can zoom in this map. So let me zoom into where I am. I'm on the east coast of the US in the state of Massachusetts. Not too far from the shore, up 95, in a little town called Boxford. That's where I am right now. And so that's pretty cool, right? I'm zooming into the map. That's pretty nice. And maybe that's all you do with the map collection, is you let people navigate the map. You can do it, although I suppose if you think about it, it's not that exciting. But I can actually put stuff inside it. It's a collection, right? It's not a map asset. It's a map collection. I can put stuff in it. Let's grab this classic point of interest icon and grab it, drag it into the map. Here we are. Put it over Boxford. You notice if I move the map, the image moves with it, but if I grab the image, I can put it wherever I want. That image is geolocated. Look in the upper right. These are the properties of the image. You can see latitude and longitude. Latitude, longitude. Again, put it wherever I want, wherever I drop it, it stays. And as a collection, I can put images, videos, documents, 3D models, buttons, collections. I can put collections in collections. I can put an asset flow in here. And it's geolocated, which is pretty neat because it means I could use it, I don't know, as a table of contents, indicating areas of historic significance, indicating my retail locations, whatever you want, right? And it takes seconds to build. I mean, it's not hard. If I wasn't speaking, it would take me 3 seconds, right? The timeline collection is like the map, except it's dates instead of latitude, longitude. And you can assign items specific days and swipe your way through the centuries and, you know, that sort of thing. So there's lots of different kind of collection types you can choose from to tell your story. It's pretty powerful stuff. Okay, great. We've mastered the assets and collections topic. Let's move on to properties. Properties. We've already been playing with the notion of properties a little bit. Well, let's continue to deep dive a tad. We'll start by taking a look at something called the content library. You see that 4th button from the upper left there? The content library is an inventory of all the media I've placed directly into my document. It's the images, the videos, the 3D models I've added directly into my experience. This is scene independent. Remember, the scene structure panel is scene specific. It's the inventory of the stuff in the scene I'm editing. The content library is scene independent. The same image might be on 7 scenes. It's only in the content library once, right? And you've got images and videos in here. There's filters. See that on the left? I can filter and just show, I don't know, documents. There's that PDF we've been using before. Let me actually drag that in. We'll shut off our filter. I just know at the bottom are some of the images we used in that collection earlier. Here's those movie posters, which I'll drag in as well, right? So we've got the 5 movie posters there. The book is here. If you remember in play mode earlier, when I was manipulating the book, it was a left and right scroll, right? I was sliding left to right, which is fine, but it doesn't look like a book. We want it to look like a book. So back in the properties panel, whatever I click, The properties panel will have the properties for that thing. In the properties panel for the book, we have the style drop-down seated in the upper right. One of the options is books. I'm going to make that a book. So that looks a little bit better, and I'll prepare you again to sit down before we play it, because when you see the page turn effect, you're going to go nuts. Here we have 5 images. I'll highlight them. Right-click, add into group. Properties panel on the right, we'll make it an asset grid. Properties panel on the right, we've got 450, 450 to make them a little bit bigger. Let me play with this a little bit more. Spread it out a tad. There you go. You can see 3 images now, right? And then back on the right side, a new category of properties, bottom right. Tap item to open. See that bottom right? Click. Tap item to open. Drag and drop item to open. Click. Great. So we've played with a bunch of properties, and we will play the experience. So now we're in play mode. Here is my book. Sorry, which I should have made it static right now. I could have made it free, but look at that awesome page turning effect. How cool is that? Isn't that beautiful? Here's the asset grid collection. Remember, tap item to open. 1, 2, 3, tap item to open, and boom, it has opened. Remember, drag and drop item to open. Drag and drop item to open. And so items are not locked inside their collection. There are properties that enable me to have those things pop out. There are tons of properties in Intuiface. Everything has properties in Intuiface. Well, actually, we can just stay in this scene, I suppose. On the left-hand side, remember I mentioned earlier, you have the experience node at the top of the scene structure panel. This experience has its own properties. Look on the right. As I open the properties panel, you'll notice the display resolution can be set here. I can specify a startup scene, that sort of thing. If we go to the design properties tab there, you can see that the background property here is currently set to an image. I could just make it a solid color. Check it out. Now it's just white. I could make it a video. I could even make it transparent, meaning that you can see third-party experiences behind it. I'm just going to Control Z this thing. I'm going to undo my changes. There are just properties all over the place in Intuiface. You can't break your experience, so feel free to play with your experience and modify a whole bunch of properties. It's amazing how much control you have over how things look and act inside your Intuiface experience. Rather than dwelling on more properties, let's now move on to triggers and actions. We'll continue to return to the properties panel throughout the webinar. Let's talk about triggers and actions, because that's a big one. Triggers and actions. When something happens, then do that. When, then, trigger, action. You need triggers and actions. It's pretty critical to your experiences to have the notion of events and things that happen as a result of those events. That's how you make your experiences react to the user, to the audience, and to their environment. Triggers and actions. You'll be using them all the time. To introduce the notion, I'm going to go under the Assets panel and drag in a button. There we go. We got a button over there. Buttons exist to make things happen. I don't have to use buttons to use triggers and actions. Everything in Intuiface is triggers and actions. Okay? When the image is rotated, when the website is viewed, when the book reaches page 6, all of these triggers are in Intuiface. Play the video, go to page 7, rotate the image. All of these actions are in Intuiface. So I don't have to use the button to use triggers and actions, just an easy way to show it off. So here's a button. Using that properties panel, there's not a great looking button really. First of all, it's white on white, which isn't very helpful. So I'll make that a red button. And then its name is button right now. That's not very helpful. We'll say press me. We'll give it a white font. We'll give it an ugly font. That's pretty ugly. And I'll make it a bit bigger. And so very quickly I can customize that button. I could use an image when the image is tapped. I don't have to use the button, but working for me. Here's the problem. The button does nothing, right? It's a button without a reason to live. We need to give that button a reason to live, so let's do that. Right click, add a trigger. See that? This is called the Triggers and Actions panel. When the Press Me button is pressed and released, then do something. When, then, trigger, action. I can actually have more than one action for a trigger, but I got to pick at least one. In this case, notice there are multiple trigger categories for the button. Each category has multiple triggers. I'm fine with is released. Then what? Then scene-to-scene navigation. Go to the scene named, I don't know, let's go to welcome. Why not? If I have a button that says start over or home, right? Well, what should happen when that button is pressed is it sends you to the scene that starts things over again, right? Maybe it's the attract loop or who knows what. So when this button is pressed or released, then go to the scene named welcome. This is how you do scene-to-scene navigation action. Isn't that simple, right? Let's see if it works. Play. All right, there's the press me button, 1, 2, 3, press me. And now I'm on the introduction to it. That's the opening scene. Do you remember how wonderful this scene was when you first saw it? I'm actually dragging my finger in the bottom of the scene. Do you see that? I'm navigating through these scenes by swiping my finger. Just as another example of how many different types of triggers are available in Intuiface, I'm clicking the background of this particular scene. I've clicked it. If you look at the scenes panel, the scene structure panel, you can see on the left, the scene node is what's selected. All the way in the upper right, see that lightning bolt? That lists the existing trigger action pairs. Actually, it's not on the, it's actually at the experience layer. You see that on the upper left? I meant the experience node. It's not at the scene level, it's at the experience level. If you look at the lightning bolt in the upper right-hand corner, you'll notice two triggers at the level of the experience as a whole. One of them is when a swipe left gesture detected, go to the next scene. You see that? And this one is when a swipe right gesture detected, go to the previous scene. So we recognize even the notion of gestures. See all these on-screen gestures you could use? There's just tons of trigger possibilities in Intuiface and action possibilities. So that was one example. That was using a button. Let me give you another example of when you might use triggers and actions, and it's a very common scenario, which is an experience in a public place that is abandoned. People walk away, right? They weren't being mean. They're not, being rude. They're just finished, and so they walk away. You don't want that experience to stay on that random scene. You want it to reset itself, right? So how do you do resetting in Intuiface? Well, I'm clicking the scene. I'm clicking the background there. That's the scene node, essentially. Right-clicking. Let's add a trigger. So we're adding a trigger at the scene level. And here we're going to choose what's called an inactivity timer. Do you see that? In this case, we'll do an inactivity timer of 3 seconds. When nothing has happened in the scene for 3 seconds, then do something. In this case, scene-to-scene navigation, go to the scene named, and we'll do the welcome again. If nothing has happened for 3 seconds, then go to the scene whose job is to attract attention. Play. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, there we go. Now, of course, 3 seconds is a ridiculously small amount of time. If you have a 2-minute video, your inactivity timer should be at least 2 minutes and 1 second, right? So pick a time that makes sense, but you get the point. That's how it works. You use inactivity timers to do the reset. I keep saying this over and over, I know, but tons of triggers and actions. Play with the product, try them out, get used to them. You will be using them all the time. And it's amazing how much flexibility you have to choreograph these super interesting scenarios that depend on the user and on the environment. I'll give you one more example, and we'll go to the design accelerators topic to have that discussion, and then I'll give you an example, okay? So design accelerators, that's the third button from the upper left. The design accelerators that's pre-built components or components of yours that you will reuse over and over again. Now, out of the box, if you open the design accelerators panel, you'll see 3 or 4 bundles here. See that button, Get More Accelerators on the left? That'll open up a large set of bundles you can download. It's button styles, background images, background videos, visual effects, things you can use so you don't have to build them yourself. They're accelerators. You don't have to use them. They're just a convenience. Notice also on the left, you can create your own accelerator. Again, this is stuff you'll reuse over and over again between different scenes, between different experiences. It could be an image. It could be a collection. It could be a scene filled with stuff. any level of granularity can become an accelerator you reuse over and over again. If you look in the bottom left, there's touch gesture icons, and so that looks pretty accurate. This one is called Animated Single Tap Black. So let's drag that in, Animated Single Tap Black. Well, it's not doing anything. It's got a name that says animated, but it's not doing anything. But okay, let's play it. Let's see if something happens. Ah, all right, so it is. It's animated. It's getting bigger and smaller. It's saying single tap here. Picture's worth 1,000 words. It's nice of Intuiface to supply these touch gesture icons, right? So here's the question. How'd they build it, right? How'd they build it? How'd we build it? So how did we build that? Well, is that a video? Is it an animated GIF? What the heck is that thing? Let's go to the scene structure panel, take a look, and oh, no, it's an image. It's just an image. Is it an animated GIF? Look in the upper right. PNG. That's a PNG. See that in the upper right? It's a PNG. Well, PNGs don't self-animate, so it's not an animated GIF. How does that work? Well, stay with me on the left. Do you see that lightning bolt? Maybe you've noticed those in the scene structure panel, these lightning bolts. Anytime you see a lightning bolt, that means there's an existing trigger action pair. Could be more than one, but there's at least one trigger action pair. That image has a trigger action pair. If I hover my mouse over the lightning bolt, it gives me a preview, but let's click it and take a look. This image has a timer, not the inactivity timer we used earlier, but has a timer of 0.1 seconds. Now I know my product. I know that what this is saying is 0.1 seconds after the image becomes visible, because timers don't work if things are not visible. So 0.1 seconds after this image becomes visible, which is essentially when this image becomes visible, then what? Well, I see resize by factor. Let's look a little closer. What's the target of this action? The target is itself. Nobody says you couldn't. It's targeting itself. What is it doing? Position size, resize. It's resizing itself by a factor of 1.5. 0.1 seconds after the image appears, it resizes itself by a scale of 1.5 by 150%. Which is still incomplete, right? Because this is telling me it's going to get bigger. It still doesn't explain the animation. But hold on a second. What is this? It says show timing and animation. Click. Aha. It's an animated resize. It takes 3 seconds. It has this performance profile. It repeats indefinitely. It could have been 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. No, indefinitely repeats. Because it's indefinite, it never ends, so reverse at end is meaningless. When it reverses, it animates the reversal. And there's no delay before the repeat. So what this is saying is, go 3 seconds to 150%, 3 seconds to 100, 3 seconds to 150, 3 seconds to 100. See? We're doing animation here. Any property representing a range of values can be animated through that range of values. In this case, we're talking about the scale factor, and it's animating between 1.0 and 1.5. It's a range of values. X and Y, width and height, rotation angle, opacity, color. I mean, anything representing a range of values can be animated through it. And remember, I can have more than one action, right? See where I'm circling? I can have multiple actions for the same trigger. And this handy little timeline doohickey in the upper right of the triggers and actions panel lets me visualize the timing of each individual action's animation to make sure that the timing is appropriate. They may not all start at the same time, right? They might come in sequentially, and I need to visualize that. So, kind of tucked away here in the triggers and actions panel is an animation capability. And I won't lie to you, this isn't super duper enterprise class. Depending on what you want to do, maybe you are better off with a video, But for simple things like this, and not so simple, I mean, you can do lots of amazing stuff with it, you'll find in the actions panel that ability to animate the change of values. A cool feature to play with. So you've been exposed to triggers and actions, you've looked at properties, you've looked at animations, you're getting a feel for Composer and how it's laid out, which is why we can move on to interface assets and binding. Read along with me, shall we? I'm looking at the bottom of the scene here. Interface assets enable your Intuiface experiences to communicate with any external data source, business logic, or device. I'm going to say that again so it's super clear. Interface assets enable your Intuiface experiences to communicate with any external data source, business logic, or device. In other words, if it has an API, we can talk to it. In particular, this means web APIs. We have really great capabilities with regard to web APIs. We even have a tool called API Explorer that automatically creates real-time bidirectional integrations with web APIs. That means your Intuiface experience can pretty much talk to anything in the cloud. Just about. Could be a database wrapped in a web API, could be an object among the Internet of Things, it could be business logic in your back office. Pretty much everything these days is a web API, which means pretty much anything in the cloud can be communicating with your Intuiface experience. It's a big deal. And you're going to need it because the more ambitious you get with your projects, the more engaging and relevant you want those projects to be, the more they need to be relevant in real time, the more personalized they need to be. You cannot avoid needing this ability to integrate with the cloud and access information on the fly. And again, it's bidirectional. It's not just reading from, but it's writing to it. So interface assets are really cool. Binding, which is the glue that makes interface assets work, we'll talk about that too, but interface assets are the thing. That's the little Lego block. So I mentioned Lego blocks earlier. We actually have a button that looks like a Lego block, and that's about interface assets. If you look on the left, I don't have any in my project just yet, but I can add an interface asset. I actually have it pre-filtered. We do have a Twitter interface asset. I'm going to add that. I also know we have a weather one, so let me add that too. That's weather from a third party, and we'll talk about that. I'm going to add that. But let's just spend a moment looking at the rest of the list here, so you get a sense for the breadth. So at the very top, there's an Excel interface asset. One can use Excel. It's sort of the poor person's database. It's a way to externalize the content you want to use in your experience, so it doesn't have to be in your experience. You take it out so the experience doesn't have to be stopped in order for you to change the content. In a couple moments, I'm going to talk about our Headless CMS. Functionally speaking, they're very similar, so let's focus on the Headless CMS, and then we can return to this idea that as an alternative, you could use Excel. But both of them, the Headless CMS, Excel, enable you to push the content outside Intuiface so your experiences don't have to be stopped when you want to make updates. Here's API Explorer. That's the tool I just mentioned that automatically creates integrations with web APIs. Not only could I use Excel to externalize content, not only could I use our Intuiface Headless CMS, you can actually integrate with anything that has a web API. You could use WordPress. You could use Airtable. You could use your own homegrown content management system. It could be your back office ERP application for your endless aisle kiosk. It could be anything. And API Explorer will help you create those. Here's the Headless CMS. We'll get to that. Data tracking is the first step for analytics. And check it out. I mean, there's a grab bag of stuff in here. Remember, Intuiface is not just about touch, just about really any kind of human-machine, audience-machine interaction. Here we are with Intuiface reading beacon IDs or acting like a beacon device. We can get system information on the fly. We can react to external triggers. Local network triggers, web triggers. The trigger is outside of Intuiface, and we're just listening for it. Was that trigger tripped? Was that trigger tripped? We keep listening for it, and if it happens, we can react to it. We support a couple computer vision solutions out of the box. One is the open source OpenVino platform from Intel. The other is a commercial solution from Sitecore called DeepSite, where you can get age, you can get gender, you can get number of views, you can get dwell time. It's pretty awesome stuff. Some geocoding examples to take an address, convert it into latitude, longitude, and vice versa. Internet of Things, this is just an example of devices that can be spoken to because they are connected to the internet. The Philips Hue light bulb is a light bulb, but you can talk to it from Composer, well, from Intuiface, because the Philips Hue light bulb lives in the cloud. It has an IP address. It has a web API. You can talk to it. You could have built that with API Explorer. You didn't need us to build it. It's just an example. Nextmosphere is a provider of sensors and controls. Motion detection and button presses and light strips and all these sorts of things. And it's very easily integrated with Intuiface. Between Intuiface and Nextmosphere, you could build a lift and learn scenario in minutes. Once you know what you're doing, where if you pick up a particular boot and a certain video plays, and it's actually not hard to build. QR code generation, another sensors example. You can send an email from Intuiface and save stuff. Example of a shopping list. Flickr is also in here. Check this out on Windows. You can talk to Intuiface and it can talk to you. These are not preset vocabulary words. I mean, any word, any phrase you want could be a trigger. And you can have Intuiface speak to the audience, which is really cool for accessibility. We didn't build that feature. That's Windows. We're using the Windows feature. Clocks and countdown timers, a scheduler, things that you may not need today, but in a month you go, you know, it'd be great if I could schedule this at 5 o'clock on Tuesday. You could do that. Global variables, random number generators. Again, stuff you may not need now, but one day you're going to thank us. Or you could build it yourself. So let me drag in Twitter. And let me drag in local weather. Looks like the internet's a little slow here on the Twitter side, but we'll see. So we have a feed on the left and a Twitter feed on the right. Let me change the Twitter feed right now and see. Notice there's properties, and I'm going to change the search query. There you go. That's a little bit richer. So the Twitter interface asset is using the Twitter API. You'll notice it has some properties I can modify and properties that are read-only. I modified the search query property to add IBM, and I can see the last few tweets that mentions IBM. These properties down here are probably more for display. That's the stuff we're showing in the design. The web API from Twitter might also trigger some actions that are exposed, and we can use those as well. No media return, result found, set certain parameters of the query, so some cool stuff in there. This is not made up. This is coming to me live from Twitter. That's what you see here. The design is called the default data template. If you look at the scene structure panel, it's group collections and text assets and image assets, and I can completely explode this design. Different fonts, different colors, different layouts, different everything. This is the default. This is so you have something to look at, but you don't have to use it at all, okay? So that's the Twitter side. Now look at the weather. So let me open up that panel again, the thing we call the X-ray panel. The X-ray panel lets me look at my interface assets, the properties, triggers, and actions of those interfaces. Here for the weather, I can modify the location, for example. Let's do that. So London is 48 and clear. Let's try Paris. Paris is 46 and clear. It's almost the same temperature in Paris. Notice this is happening in real time. Again, we're not faking this weather. We're live in the moment, speaking to, in this case, World Weather Online, which is a third-party provider of weather information. They have a web API, and what we're doing under the covers is speaking to the World Weather Online web API. So at design time, I am seeing the exact information at that moment. It's working right now. Let me play. Let's test our work here. And we'll start by manipulating the weather forecast. You can see it's a touch screen. I can navigate through it. I can move it around my screen for that matter. We do have on-screen keyboard. In fact, we have on-screen keyboards for 30 languages, give or take, something like that. In this case, let's check out the weather in Boston, which is close to me. It's not 46 and clear. It is 57 and partly cloudy. So it's a little warmer here. If I look outside, I'm seeing blue skies, but I'm a little north of Boston. So we do have lots of different languages supported for an on-screen keyboard. You do not need a physical keyboard. On the right, we have our Twitter feed here. You can see the last few tweets mentioning IBM. Remember tap item to open? Do you remember that? Oh, yes. Yes, it still works. So even though this is coming to us dynamically on the fly over the network, we can still treat it as if it were local. Isn't that awesome? Did you see all the coding I did? Oh, you didn't? That's because there was no coding. None whatsoever. This is all automatic. And recall, with API Explorer, you can build your own interface assets for any service. It doesn't just have to be what we provide. All right, now remember, this is called interface assets and binding. We call this interface assets and binding. Binding is the glue. Let me go to my scene structure panel on the left and show you that on the left, this text asset right here on the left contains 46. Text asset contains 46. It's 46 degrees Fahrenheit. That 46 is coming from the World Weather Online API. It is not here. I didn't type it in. Well, let's see how that's represented in the properties panel. So if we open it up, check it out, upper right, you'll see that the text property is set to 46, but it's got that funky color, which means it's coming from someplace else. You see what happens when I hover my mouse? It's coming from the temperature Fahrenheit property of the local weather interface asset. Let me open that up so you can stare at it for more than a couple seconds. It's coming from this property exposed by the World Weather Online Web API. Check it out. If I click temperature Celsius, click my design updates, because now I'm saying, no, I want the temperature Celsius value put into this text asset, and the design says, all right, whatever you want, we can do it. Now, of course, if I do that, I need to go back to my design, maybe change the Fahrenheit symbol to a Celsius symbol. You get the point, right? But that's this magic of taking the source value and mapping it to the target. That's binding. That's what we call binding. That's the glue, enabling us to map a source value to the target UI element. I don't need interface assets to do binding. You can bind properties to properties in an experience, no interface assets involved. When interface assets are involved, you're definitely using binding. You can't not do that. We even have, check it out in the upper right, we even have binding converters. You can modify the value with all these different formulas and different methods of manipulation to modify that value before it's given to the target UI property or element. So think of all the hidden features buried in here. How impressive is that? All right, so that's the general notion of working with interface assets, of accessing content information from outside Intuiface and bringing it in. Let's go to our next subject, the headless CMS, because this is our content management system. This is what we provide you to enable you to externalize your content, modify that content, control it outside of the running experience. Let's read the little sentence at the bottom together. The Headless CMS is a cloud-hosted repository enabling content managers to define, store, and manage the media and information used by Intuiface deployments anywhere in the world. In other words, if you want to make a change to the content, you don't have to use Composer. You don't have to edit the experience. Just change the information in the Headless CMS, and the running experience will see the change. Now, I have that running in my browser. So here, on the My Intuiface website, which everybody has access to, and you have an Intuiface account, you can see Intuiface Headless CMS right there in the middle. If I click that, this will open up the list of bases that I already have access to. I can make new bases if I want. There's one base currently available for this particular Intuiface account, some sort of demo experience, which is a big shock because I'm doing a demo right now. We have noticed 3 tabs: dashboard, structure, content. The dashboard is information about the base at large. You'll notice multiple experiences are using the base. You'll notice multiple people have access rights, multiple accounts have access right to this base. That means they have varying levels of control over what's inside that base. If you look at the structure tab, this is where you define the data structure. You're ignoring the content. This is about the structure. And it turns out that for the Van Gogh database, there are 2 different types of structure, 2 components in the upper left. There's a general information group collection, and then an artwork multi-item collection. So basically single item, multiple item. The general information data structure, title, logo, so the title of the Van Gogh exhibit, I guess, the logo for the Van Gogh exhibit. There's not multiple instances of that. There's a title and there's a logo. So you have that. Whereas for the artwork, could be more than one, right? So the data structure is illustration and title. For each piece of artwork, there's an illustration and there's a title. So in the data structure here, you're just seeing it once. But when we flip to the content tab in a moment, you'll see there's multiple pieces of artwork. Before we do that, though, if I go back to general information, you'll notice after title, there's a green dot. You see that green dot? It's referencing a variant called language, which is there in the bottom left. One of the really cool features of the Headless CMS is you can identify variants. This means there are certain data structure properties that will vary based on context. Not all of the items, just some of them. So for example, I might have multiple languages. English, French. The name of the exhibit in French will be different from the name of the exhibit in English, but the logo will be the same. So what I do is I create a language variant, and I say the title will vary based on the variant, but the logo will not. This is really powerful stuff when you start building complex data structures. Let's look at the Content tab. We're starting with general information. So this is the English variant. The title is Van Gogh artwork. The logo is that little face of Van Gogh. If I change the variant to French, notice here the title is Tableau de Van Gogh. The logo is the same. Here I'm specifying the content. We defined the data structure elsewhere. Here we have the content. Now back on the left for artwork. There's no variance here. It's the name of the, in fact, we just have the illustration here. On the structure, did I see a name? Illustration, artwork, title. We just haven't assigned titles to the content yet. So you're just seeing the illustrations here right now. And you'll notice there's multiple pieces of artwork. And Van Gogh painted more than once, so that's no surprise. So here's all the different pieces of artwork available to me. Let's go back to my experience. Here under interface assets, let's add an interface asset, and as I recall, it's way up top, Headless CMS. It knows, because I'm editing my experience, it knows my account. Here are the bases available to me. I'm going to add this base to my experience, and you can see it in the list of interface assets. You can see the base. There it is on the left. Open up the X-ray panel, properties, triggers, and actions. Here's general information. Here's the artwork. Watch what happens if I just drag in the artwork. It generates the design. It's the information you just saw in the cloud. Because remember, when I showed you the Headless CMS, that was in my browser. I can control the data structure and the content in the cloud. My running experiences will see it. And whenever you make changes in the cloud, those changes will appear in your running experience. How awesome is that? You can do that with Excel. You can do that with other third-party databases, anything accessible through a web API. But the Headless CMS is natively integrated. Everybody has access to it. So it's the first thing you should look at. It's pretty powerful stuff. It works really easily. And one of the nice things is whenever you use the Headless CMS, there's always a local copy of the base. So what you're editing in the browser is the master, and then each instance of the experience using the base has its own local copy, and that copy synchronizes with the master in the cloud. The experience is referencing the local copy, which means it's really quick, it's very fast, it's not talking to the cloud, and you can actually be offline, and you can still pull data from the base, you can still filter it based on variance or other kinds of factors without having to worry about network connectivity. So you got a lot of power there. So that's just a touch, just a taste of the Headless CMS. There's a whole course in our academy, the Intuiface Academy, about that. One last topic before we talk about some big picture stuff and wrap up the webinar is analytics. Analytics. Why don't you read those words at the bottom of the scene with me? Turn your Intuiface experience into an essential KPI resource by defining, collecting, visualizing, and sharing the data that drive design, operational, and business insights. In other words, you can't manage it if you don't measure it. And the beauty of Intuiface is you have tons you can measure, and we even give you the ability to create your own charts and publish your own dashboards. This is the headlight on a dark night. You know which installations get the highest traffic, you know the average dwell time, you know the typical number of users, you know what they're doing, and you know what they're doing based on context, based on the weather outside, based on the exhibit on display, based on the promotion that's running, based on the sports score. You know all of this stuff. It's the beauty of interactive digital content, and it's the beauty of Intuiface's ability to communicate with any web API, and thus anything outside the experience as well. Let's go back to the browser, head back to the My Intuiface website, all those buttons, and here, right next to the Headless CMS, you'll see Analytics Dashboards. That's where you'll access the dashboards that you create. Everyone, if you look in the left, upper left, trade show dashboard, everybody has access to this dashboard. If you have an account, you have this. You could be doing this right now. This is some old data set we collected from a trade show a few years ago. And you'll notice we have bar charts and line charts and stacks and pie charts and range and single value. And so we have over 30 different chart types. Each one of these charts is interactive. Notice I can filter based on my clicks in this particular key there on the right of the chart. And all of this information technically can be updated in real time. Every time there's new data, you can refresh these charts and it has the latest data. I can share it. So in the upper right-hand corner, I'm clicking the share icon. I can publish these dashboards and make them available to various parties. I can actually have multiple URLs for the same dashboard, and I might use that because I might have multiple groups, and I want to be able to differentiate them in terms of their ability to access it. I can also embed these in iframes if I want. You'll notice there's the URL, there's the iframe code. So I can choose to embed them in a web page or just have them be standalone. And I can control, there are some, what's the title, and do I want to allow them to be interactive, sort of things like that. On the dashboard itself, in the sort of upper right, you can see add a chart. So I can actually add more charts. Lots of templates I can use, or I can just head on over to create a new chart from scratch. Let's say I want to find out the average usage time per experience. How long was each one typically run? So I'm putting experience name on the x-axis, elapsed time by experience on the y-axis, and there's my chart. Not super interesting, but we just want to build something simple. So I have 3 different experiences. That's their average runtime right now, and I can put in labels and change the data. I can do lots of stuff. I can also change the chart type, so I can make this a pie chart instead of a line chart, and tons of control. On the left, that's all the data that I've collected. The data at the top is always collected all the time for every data point. The data on the bottom left, that's the custom data you told your running experience to collect, and that is unlimited. You can collect whatever you want. You know, if Intuiface can see it, you can collect it. So that's analytics. We have agencies and integrators selling analytic services, but even if you're just a sales and marketing team, you still have bosses and they still want to know, how's it going? And analytics is a means to achieving that. We could say a lot more about analytics, but there's a whole other course about analytics as well in Intuiface Academy, so check that out. We've looked at all the big stuff. Let's talk a little bit about what you do with your amazing experiences once you've created them. Well, first you need to think about publishing them. If you want to remotely deploy them, so you don't have to be on site, if you want to share them with colleagues or clients, you need to publish them first. Publish means putting a copy in the cloud. Everybody has access to Intuiface Cloud Storage. Your platform tier determines how much storage you get. Enterprise accounts, pretty much unlimited. But under the covers, it's Amazon Web Services, it's AWS. So it's Amazon's infrastructure, very scalable, very reliable. The vast majority of our customers, they just publish. If you don't do anything, look under the file menu. See file menu in the upper left? See publish to share or deploy? That just publishes to the cloud, to the Intuiface Cloud Storage. It just works. You can use your own AWS, your own Amazon Web Services S3 bucket if you want. So you can use your own, the one set up by your organization, or you can use Intuiface's. Remember, we're ISO 27001 certified. That's the information security standard, and so you can safely rely on us to protect that information if you use our cloud storage. If you've published it, then you can, for example, share it, which means enabling colleagues and clients to access it. If I go back to my Intuiface, to the list of buttons, you can see my experiences and my players. Let me click my experiences. And here we have the experiences that either my account published or that was shared with me. And if I open up one of these experiences, I get some information, including my ability to share it with a URL or share it with an account. You see that? Share with URL, share with account. Share with URL means that you give them a URL and we sort of automate the process of downloading, installing player, downloading, installing, activating the license, downloading and running the experience. So the account doing the sharing needs to have an available player license. You can't share by URL for free, but if a player license is available, then a third party who knows nothing about Intuiface could enter the URL and we'll take care of installing and setting everything up and running it so they can take a look. Share with account is more about sharing with other Intuiface accounts so they can make modifications. That's typically why you do it. You can actually share with read access or write access. You can see it there. You can share with either level of privileges. Typically it's for editing, but you can do both. You can do both. If you share with write access, it's one person at a time. Just be aware of that. So you can't have multiple editors at the same time. It's always one account at a time with a pen. If you have multiple people using Composer in the same Intuiface account, you don't have to share it with them. You're in the same account. This sharing is with different Intuiface accounts, not multiple users in the same account. So that's sharing. The other main reason to publish is to deploy. You'll notice that for this experience, there's a deploy tab. On that deploy tab are the list of players I currently have access to, and I can pick a set of players, I can filter and sort them, and then I can deploy to them. And you'll notice, so if I pick just one random player, see if you look at the deploy button down there, I can deploy or I can actually schedule that deployment. So I don't have to do it right away. I have scheduling options instead. Let's go to the players view. So this is the players view. Right now I have 5 players running. No other ones that I can see. Any offline? Let's see. I'm clicking on the right offline. Yeah, so some of them are offline, but that's okay. You can actually schedule deployment to offline devices if you want, but these are online. If I click one of these experiences, that screenshot is not a joke. That's a screenshot. It's taken every X number of seconds. I don't remember how quickly, but so that's a live screenshot of what's happening in that player device. It even tells you here at the top what experience is it running. It's running this experience called Kiosk Menu next month. Here you have information including tags. See the tags there? That's how you filter players in Intuiface. You specify tags. Show me all the players tag Chicago. And so you should set it up so every time you install a player in Chicago, you should give it a tag that says Chicago. And so if you want to go all players in Chicago, just enter the tag Chicago. Here we have deploy again. In this case, we're looking at a player, so this is about deploying an experience. So here I pick the experience I want to deploy. If I go back to the list of players, you can, of course, select multiple players. I could do all 5 here, so I've selected all 5. And then for all selected devices, I can do my deployment. So you can do any level of granularity. So that's how deployment works as well. Guess what, folks? We've covered everything. So let's just talk about your next steps. You were brilliant. I mean, what you've done is decided to join me for this webinar, and that is certainly the best way to get to know Intuiface. You don't know what you don't know. And by joining me at this webinar, hopefully I covered all the bases for you. There's lots of additional information available to you. If you go under the Resources tab on our website, you can see the Intuiface Academy, which is a free set of courses for anybody with an Intuiface account. There's a course about the Headless CMS, a course about analytics, a course that walks you through Composer. There's a course about interface assets, etc. Documentation. Over 400 articles in an online library that's updated daily with a great search engine. You're not going to find a better documented product than Intuiface. There are lots of other webinars you could choose to watch, accessible through our website. Tons of free sample experiences. Let me show you that actually. When you launch in Composer, you're going to be presented with the Experiences panel, which is this thing. And the 4th tab is called Marketplace. And that's where you'll find all of the free experiences we've made available to you. I don't know, 70, 80 experiences. We call it the Marketplace because we do allow customers to provide their work either for a fee or for free. So this is not just those produced by us, but there's over 60 sample experiences in here that you can download for free. All of them have great themes to give them a reason for living. And they're open source, quote unquote. You can see how we built it. You can reverse engineer it. You can steal from it, or at the very least to be inspired by it. Download them into Composer and try them out. See if you can figure out how we did it. Play with them a little bit, etc. So you got those. Excuse me. To get assistance, let's start with Ask Support. Everybody can talk to our support team via online forums. So you're not calling everybody, but you can submit questions. You never wait more than a day to get an answer from our brilliant support staff. And services, so we're not a full service agency. That's not our business. But if you want some small dose consulting, 30-minute increments, hourly increments, you can do that kind of consulting. We also have some services that are kind of bootstrapping your project. In other words, you tell us what you want to do. We kind of help you get started to figure out the intricacies of building it out in Intuiface. We also have a bootstrap for analytics to kind of help you ramp up in identifying the key performance indicators and how to instrument your experience to collect the right kind of data. So they're all sort of enablers to help you be successful with Intuiface, and you can check those out there as well. Tons of information online, lots of happy customers. So let me wrap up by talking about that. You can see in that same resources panel, Intuiface community, you can talk to other users. So you don't have to believe us. You can talk to other people, see what they did, get their opinion as well. I don't know if you can tell, I love this product. I've been with this company for 10 plus years. Maybe it's, what is it if you're a hostage, you fall in love with your, I don't know, maybe I fall in love with my captor, but I think this product kicks butt. I think you will too. So what you need to do is not trust anything that I said. Download the product, start our trial, get your hands dirty, walk through the academy, run the tutorial that's in the academy, start downloading some sample experiences, build your own stuff, and prove to yourself that it's as amazing as I think it is. Thank you so much for joining me for this webinar recording. Thank you so much for your interest in Intuiface. Good luck and have fun.